You guys hear me okay in the back? My voice is a little bad right now, but yeah, thank you. Nice to see everybody here. I was here at 1 o'clock and I was like, man, I don't think anybody's going to show up to this thing. So I'm glad to see this thing filled out a bit. Jordan, I think we were going to kind of talk about how I transitioned a little bit.
Yeah, like going from tour player into coach and then specializing in the short game area and what it kind of took and how you bridged the gap between those three elements.
Yeah, so I played on tour 2007 through, I played 2 events last year. So I played for a long time on tour. A lot of years not so great, but learned a lot. And then about 5 years ago, a caddy friend of mine was like, man, your short game is so good, you should put some tips on Instagram. And I wasn't even on Instagram, put these tips out there, and a couple days later, Kevin Streelman reached out to me. And he said, hey, I want to spend a couple hours with you. We spent a couple hours together, and he said, let's do it again next week. And then we did it again, and we worked for 6 months straight. He went from 93rd in the world to 45th in the world. And then all of a sudden I was like, wow, I'm actually fairly good at communicating the things that I felt like I did a good job of on tour. And it's not always that it goes hand in hand, where if you play well on tour, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a great communicator or an instructor. And sometimes the things that you're feeling as a player are not necessarily what you're doing
I'm
real life.
I'm sure you could rattle off exactly how you worked on your short game and just you would understand it to a T, but the individual in front of you might need a little extra coaching and help with that, right?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I did, as I started to get more into the teaching space, was I started doing these PGA Tour live broadcasts. And I would go back to Florida, and you'd sit literally in a room smaller than where we are right here, and you'd spend 12 hours calling golf. And you got to take what would be like a 4-minute thought and take it into a 20-second soundbite. And so you really had to shrink down and really get your communication skills in a spot where people could understand you that were on the other side watching the show.
Right, really compress the data and really hit the pertinent things that are specific to improvement.
Yeah, and so as I've transitioned out of playing and into coaching a bit more, it really is how you deliver your information. You could have the greatest information in the world, and I've taken a lot of lessons from some of the greatest instructors in the world. And a lot of it comes down to how you communicate your information. And I know a lot of you are really smart, but work on that communication, work on those skills, work on understanding your student. Are they somebody who likes to see it? Are they somebody who likes to sort of feel it? Right. Can you give them 9 different ways of feeling the same thing that you're trying to say? I mean, I always remember Jamie Mulligan, watching him put a hacky sack on guys' heads, right? Just to give them that sort of external cue. I can't stress enough, being on the playing side and on the coaching side, give your players 9 different ways to understand the one thing that you're trying to tell them. Find 9 different ways. That's a great coach right there. If you can find 9 different ways to tell them that one thing that hopefully is going to be a light bulb moment for them.
I mean, I first heard that from Jim McLachlin out in Miami, and it has stayed with me throughout my entire teaching career, all the way to what I'm training all of my guys to do up in LA. Right? You have to be able to have an idea of what you're trying to do and create, and have 9 different drills, 9 different variations of how to communicate it, because you'll probably get to the 9th one occasionally, and then it's like, aha.
Yeah, and so I decided to go down the sort of the lane of short game. I was very good at chipping and putting, and I was always very confident in that. The tour event that I won, I hit 1 green in regulation on Sunday on the front 9, and was even par. It was 8 for 8 on up and downs. So I was always very good at it. So I decided to go down that one path. And so people that come see me for Full Swing, I'm like, here's the number of 3 guys I trust. I'm not your guy. So I try to know where my boundaries are, where my limits are. I think that's probably a sign of a good coach, somebody that can say, look, this is not my specialty. Let's go see somebody else for this. And I've had that in the past, being on the playing side, having coaches where I wish that they would have said, you know what, this is I'm not seeing you, or I'm not delivering the information correctly. Let's go get another opinion.
Build a team around you to help the individual, right? Like we do that with physio at my academy. We have someone off campus that we send all of our students to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go tell somebody how to lift weights properly. I mean, I'm 165 soaking wet. Like, that's not my specialty. But I know how to get a ball up and down, whether it's through grit or routine or proper technique or reading a lie or any of that kind of stuff. That's where I feel like I can really add value to a player. And so I really just try to stay in that lane and give the player everything that I've got inside of 50, 100 yards. That's where I'm going to stay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, feel free at any time if anyone's got questions, raise your hand. This is, I want this to be informative, and if I'm going in the wrong direction, you guys aren't interested, raise your hand and let's get back on topic.
And would you say, like, relatively speaking, about 2/3 of your score comes from 100 yards and in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, obviously putting accounts for a ton of it, right? And then anything inside of 100 yards, I mean, I always, Paul Azinger would always tell me, he's like, look, when you're looking at it, I'm probably going to get 12 wedge shots a day, right? 4 par 5s and maybe 8 others where I could probably get a wedge in my hand, 9-iron or a wedge. So you got to get good with those clubs, and then you're going to miss some greens, and you got to get good with having a variety of shots to get the ball up and down.
All the tools in your chest.
Yeah. And so talking about the tools in the chest, let's sort of dive into some philosophy. I think that's probably what a lot of people are here for. So the way that I sort of look at short game is that I look at it as a couple different families. You've got sort of the right-handed family, or the trail hand family, which would be like a putting stroke, a bump and run, and a pitch shot. Those all live in the same family in my viewpoint. On the other side, the other family is more of the lead hand. So that's going to be your bunker shot, your shots out of the rough, and your flop shot. So the way that I like to sort of teach my players is to have them understand that those are two separate families, and we don't want to get those families confused. They don't intermingle very well. Right. So if I want to go high, I'm creating this look right here. If I want to flight it a little bit lower, I'm creating more of this look right here. So that's usually where I start with my. I mean, I probably see 90% amateur golfers and 10% tour players. I mean, I work with a lot of tour players, but I see more amateur golfers, and the mission is to, get good information and help the amateur golfer get better, enjoy the game more.
And how many of those amateur golfers come to you and just, I want to learn the flop shot. I want to get over the bunker to the tight pin. How do I do that? How do I do it?
Right. No, absolutely. And then they take that same mentality to a bump and run. And it's like, well, why am I chunking it? Well, it's because the club looks like this right here. So we got to keep those two families separate. I think that's one of those things where if you can kind of understand that those things are very separate, and in one we're using a lot more of our bigger muscles, and the other one is a lot more wrists, arms, and hands. So to me, I always start, excuse me, I always start my amateur golfers. Even I was just working with a mini tour player who plays on the PGA Tour, Latin America Tour. So he was just over here a minute ago, and he was getting off. He was just like what we had talked about. I've worked with him for a couple years now, and he's like, everything's off. And his backswing looked like this for like a 15-yard shot. And so I was like, we got to get back to some basics. And so I grabbed the 5-iron, I put it in his hand, and I said, chip this a yard. So he got up there, and I was like, you're not going to do this to try to chip it a yard, are you? He said, no. He said, I'm gonna look like this. I said, okay, you look like you've got a putting stroke now. So what I want to do is I want to build that foundation, right? So I want to build that foundation with a putting stroke, and then let it move into my bump and run, which I may shift the ball position back a little, handle goes a little forward, but I'm making a very similar stroke. And then as I go up in loft, I'll get higher lofted club, and I'll get the ball position a little more forward, and it'll still feel like a rotational motion, like a bigger putting stroke type of a motion with a few more dynamic movements. But the thought process is we got to get our players to have a foundation. What is their foundation? Because if their foundation is up this way, cutting across it, then they're going to get way off, right? And it's going to be really hard to kind of get back to neutral.
And I assume you're always looking for the constant. What's the constant that they're doing now that I could come in and edit and change that can make this person the best chipper or short game person that they could be, right? But you have to have that constant first in order to edit.
Yeah, we're always, I mean, you know, our job, right? We're all professional guessers. I mean, that's just what it is. We're trying to guess and get the best matchup for our player as possible. So if I see somebody that comes in and he looks like this and this club goes straight up and down, I'm like, okay, well, how are you chipping it? Are you chipping it good? No, I'm sticking it in the ground. Okay, well, we need to change a couple things and get you in a different spot. So, you know, paying attention to shaft lean, paying attention to ball position, spine angle, all that stuff. The setup part of it is so massively important because the swing's really not that long. So we got to get ourselves in a good setup. And so no better way to get yourself in a good setup than to feel like you're making a putting stroke, right? You get up, you get set up here and you're like, all right, not much can go wrong from here. I'm just going to use my shoulders and go back and through. And if you start there and then start working out, I think that's much easier than trying to hit a trick shot to start with. Like, hey, let me hit the flop shot over the bunker, or let me hit a high spinner. That comes later. You got to build that foundation, and then you can get creative off of that foundation, right? It's like if you're building a house, you're not just like, man, I'm going to pick out the shingles first, and I'm going to hang the chandelier first.
Start with the foundation.
Lay the foundation. It's boring, right? But you got to put it down brick by brick.
We always do like a low shot and a high shot, and then we explain there'll be variations of each. But right now, let's just keep it simple. If you want the ball to go high, put it up, a little bit more rotation. You want it to go low, put it in the back of your stance. And then once they master that, then we can start to teach more variations and more complex trick shots.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I would just say that it's amazing when you start a person with a 5-iron, what they do.
Right.
The
touch you have to have on that is crazy.
I mean, 9 out of 10 people, I say, hit it a yard. And 9 out of 10 people hit it 25 yards, right? They get up here and they're like, I was like, hit it a yard, right? It's like, all I want you to do is feel like you're getting the closest you've ever been to the golf ball, and you make a putting stroke, and you hit it 1 yard. That's it, right? In my mind, you know, short game's about removing the ball speed. We got to remove the ball speed so that then I can build it back in the proper ways, in the proper channels. But you got to start by understanding how to remove the ball speed, right? And so certain things that obviously will create ball speed are going to be shaft lean, club face, right? If the club face is turned in, if the shaft is leaning forward, if your weight position is forward, all these things are going to increase the ball speed, right? Just at your setup. And then backswing, there's ways that you're going to increase ball speed as well, right? If I get up here and I've got this wrist looking like this, I'm creating ball speed. So you know, and if you're trying to hit a shot that's 8 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards, 20 yards, and you look like this, you've got to do a lot of other things to sort of compensate, right? Which then just complicates your matchup.
It's like we always say, like you're adding a lot of variables into an easy equation where you take x plus 3 equals 6. Well, you're putting a line underneath it, putting parentheses off to the third power and a x minus y underneath it, right? Where it's, if we can kind of make it simple at first and gain that understanding of the simplicity of it and own that, that's when the variations come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really try to get my players to get in a spot where they're really neutral at setup. I want them to understand where neutral is with shaft lean, with weight position, with club face. I mean, I see tons of amateurs that come in with the club face looking like that. Tons of amateurs that come in, ball position back, handle way forward, weight way forward in an effort to really hit the ball first, right? They think, I've got to make good ball contact. I don't think you necessarily have to make really good ball contact to be a great short gamer. I think that, yeah, obviously we want to make great ball contact, but I don't think that that's the end all be all as far as if you're a great short gamer.
We want to miss it really well.
I want my misses to be here, not my misses to be right here, so that I got to chip again. So, you know, in my view, if I can get my guys to set up in a neutral spot, so spine angle, weight position, shaft position, club face, that gets them in a pretty good spot to where they can make some poor swings and still get away with it. Because again, we're not all perfect. None of my pros are perfect. My pros hit really bad shots. But it's the ones that they hit really bad that end up 4 feet that they're like, that's why I'm building this margin of error in. Keeps them in the game. And the amateur golfers, obviously the dispersion is much greater. So their bad shots are going to be 10x worse than the tour player's bad shot. So if you've got an amateur golfer that's set up looking like this, his bad shot is going to be really, really bad, right?
He's going to lay the sod over it, or he's going to scull it over the green.
Yeah, he's going to hit some good ones from there potentially, but he's also going to hit some really, really bad ones. So setup is massively important. And again, it goes back to, can we get him set up like almost like a putt, right? Like, I mean, I can't stress that enough. It's like once you're in a good setup spot for a putt, that kind of can bleed into everything else when it comes to inside of 30 yards, you know, pitching the golf ball. So to me, like that's where we start. Putting, bump and run, pitch shot. And I'll do a drill where I'll set golf balls, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 yards off the green, and I'll have my players go 5 iron, 7 iron, 9 iron, gap wedge. This will get them understanding, and all I'm trying to do is get them to land the ball right about here. So fairly short shots that I'm having them really just understand how to use their body. You know, a lot of players will really try to hit it, right? And it's like I get a lot of the guys that have a lot of speed. Like one of my latest tour players is a guy named Kevin Doherty, who led the tour in driving distance this year. And he did not understand how to remove everything that he did so well to create ball speed. We needed to take all that away to remove that ball speed, but yet to still have him have enough spin to get the golf ball to stop. Like, I don't want to remove the spin, but I want to be able to remove the ball speed so that when he's hitting a 30-yard pitch shot, it's not coming off the face like, oh, sit down, that's 40, right? He can't afford that. So, yeah, even with Kevin, we started with a drill like this. I was like, hit me a 5 iron, right? Show me a putting stroke. He's like, well, I would never get like this, because his tendency was to kind of get this right elbow retracted this way. And so I had him with a 5 iron. I was like, would you ever do that with a 5 iron? He's like, no, right? So it's like, when you bring it back to something so small, and you take away the loft, right? You go from something super lofted to something less lofted. Players will all of a sudden not be doing the crazy things that they do once you give them a 60 degree. You give them a 60 degree and it's like, man, they could do all kinds of stuff. But if I take this 60 degree away and I give them a 7 iron or a 5 iron, I'm telling you what, they're not going to be doing this because this ball is just going to take off. And they'll learn that real quick. But 9 out of 10 of the people that even tour players, that I put 5 iron in their hands, first ball is 20 feet too far. And we go to like literally a 20 foot, like carry it 1 yard, and it's going to roll like 20 feet. And it goes 20 feet too far.
No, and it's also kind of like with the amateurs that we teach, like they're always innately going to try and use their hands to create the shot, as opposed to what Parker's talking about, where we're using kind of what we call our dumb muscles, our bigger muscles, to create this pendulum motion at first to get the feel and understanding of proper ball contact. And again, a lot of that will take away the spin and the speed while still creating good contact.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, right? So I mean, a lot of the people that I see are short shots. It's like, okay, let me just be everything quiet. Let me just do that, right? And it's like, some people can do that, and that's fine, no problem. But I think that it's you got to practice that a lot. And I would rather you use your bigger muscles.
And most people don't have the time to practice that a lot. Like they're not tour players. They got maybe 1 to 3 hours a week, and they're on the range, right? That's where that 2/3 come in. Like if 2/3 of your score comes from 100 yards and in, maybe that's where 2/3 of the practice should be.
Yeah. And, you know, I had a great mentor in Paul Azinger, and he would always tell me, he said, Parker, he's like, under pressure, I know that my big muscles will be there for me. I'm not sure if these guys are going to be there for me. So these guys are much more fast twitch muscles. Big muscles are much sort of slower twitch muscles. And so I get my players doing a variety of things to it really engage those big muscles. So I'll get them sticking it in their belly button, having them pivot back, pivot through, and it's amazing to me to see like people they don't really understand that how impactful it is to actually pivot when you're hitting a pitch shot of really any length. But you look at most tour players and they're all finished this way on the through swing. Even for like a 20-yard shot, they all look like this. There's not many of them that look like this, right? So it's like we got to engage the pivot, and when we talk about the pivot, it's like it's got to be a pivot on the back so you can get a pivot on the through. It can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to go arms here and then I'm going to pivot, because then that shifts your path too far to the left for a right-handed player. But really getting your players to understand how to pivot, I think, is an important thing. I talk about that all the time with my players, how we got to get the pivot involved. You know, we'll do all kinds of drills. I'll have them kind of keep it in this right hand and just understand this motion here. Having the left hand and the right hand work back together. This motion just in itself just really gets you pivoting properly.
So other than less loft, what do you think the secret sauce is for you on getting that maybe unathletic person to understand about pivot?
Well, I mean, well, when you talk about less loft, it's like you got to earn your way up to like a 56 or 60 degree in my book. Like I won't let my son get a 60 degree till he's like 16, probably 17, until he shows me he has command of a 56 degree. Matt Kuchar, a buddy of mine, same thing. He's just like, his son Cameron still doesn't have a 60 degree. So it's like you have to earn your way towards more loft. You have to understand how to play the ball on the ground first. And then it's sort of as you get better, you can start to have the ability to then use this higher lofted club. I forget what your question was. I'm sorry.
We got one right there. So then, Parker, when you're dealing with the non-good athlete that does not have supple arms and supple motion, and you've got that hypertension, what are your 9 different ways that you'll go through removing that energy from their arms, removing that energy away from the anticipation of strike, and help them find the ground?
Yeah, that's a great question. Could you guys all hear that? Everybody over there, could you guys hear that? Yeah, it was a fantastic question. He said, what are the 9, the 9 ways that I talk about to try to find that one thing that's going to connect with your player. And so for someone that doesn't have the supple arms and the athleticism, what are the ways that I would go through to get them to have a bit more suppleness, not be so intent on striking the golf ball? Is that about it? Find the bottom a little bit better. Yeah, so I mean, I had this one great, this teacher, Pam Barnett. She played on the LPGA a long time ago, and she was an awesome mentor of mine when I was first kind of turning pro. She had this one thing where she talked about tension, and I mean, this thing has stuck with me forever. But tension, it can be in your hands, but it can also be in your forearms, in your elbows, up to your shoulders, in your neck. So Pam would always say, she'd make me grip the club. I'm gonna have you grip it. So she'd make me grip the club like that, and then I would see how locked his elbows are. I'm trying to push up, right? So most people soften the elbows. There you go. Looks a little weird on camera. I'm sorry, but as you can kind of see, like, now grip as hard as you can there, but keep these soft. Soft. Just let me do it. Soften the elbows. There you go. So you can grip as hard as you want to with the hands, as long as the tension doesn't keep creeping up here. That would be one way, right? I would, play some drills with them as far as like, hey, can you give me like a 2 out of 10 here? Can we soften the arms? Can we grip as hard as we can here, but have these guys soft? And then we talk about putting, and a lot of the people that struggle with chipping struggle with putting too. So it's like, okay, well, is it more of a mental thing, or like then do we start doing some stuff, not being able to see the golf ball, or are they just making practice swings and I'm there and I put one in every 5 practice swings? Are they this way with their putter because they've got the yips? It's all those kinds of things. I'm like, well, if you're this way with your putter because you yip it, you're probably going to do that with your 7-iron or your 9-iron or your wedge. So then I get them doing that, and it's all of a sudden they're like, oh, that feels better. It's like, go ahead, chip it that way. It doesn't matter, right? Like, chip the ball that way. That's okay. You throw it up your arm, whatever works, right? But you have to, if someone's dealing with like severe anxiety, yips, and all that stuff, you've got to change some type of setup to where it's so extreme that they don't know they don't really understand how their brain is supposed to save them, right? So which is why like guys go to the broomstick, because it's so different than what it was here, right? Look at like Lucas Glover would be a great example. But there's guys, there's more guys now chipping cross-handed than ever before. I was just in France last week with Matthew Pavon. He's been chipping cross-handed for 12 years off of tight fairway lies, and he's great at it. Like he's positive strokes gained on the year, chipping off a tight fairway lie inside of 30 yards, cross-handed, right? So it's like there's no wrong answer. It's just like you got to find different ways of you got to figure out, number one, is it a setup and technique thing, right? Because then that leads you down one path. If they start showing some improvement based on their setup and technique. If the setup and technique you change, and then it's still like a mental thing, then it's like, okay, now we got to go a different route. We got to go like, let's blindfold. Let's change a grit. Let's severely change something, so that your brain doesn't step in there and be like, I have to save him, right? I have to save him or her, whatever it is. Like, I have to save it. Because that's what your brain's doing. They're in some type of a bad spot at setup or backswing, and then it's like, I got to save. And that's usually what I've found. That's usually what happens with people that really struggle. But a lot of times I can get them out of it with technique, because I can get them in a different setup spot and a different backswing spot. But if that doesn't work, then it's a mental thing. And it's like, okay, well, how long have you been dealing with it? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years? If it's that, then it's like, we got a lot of heavy lifting to do. If it's like, man, I was a D3 college player, but now I worked for 15 years and now I'm trying to get back into golf, and now I stink at chipping, and I've been dealing with it for 6 months. It's like, that guy's going to probably be better by the end of the session. The other guy, it's going to be a lot more heavy lifting. And it's going to take mental work too, of like, dude, we got to go through like the whole process of like routine, the whole thing, to really try to clear the mechanism that's holding him back. But yeah, I mean, I've seen both, where it's like one guy, he's out of it in 2 hours. The other guy, it's like he keeps coming back and coming back and coming back, and it's like, it's a lot of heavy lifting, but it just depends on how long they've been struggling with it. Good. I mean, that's a great question. Yeah.
So if it's like a mental thing, and you have 2 hours before they keep coming back, how do you, and they're not seeing results, how do you build trust with them to keep them coming back?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry. He said if they're not seeing like the full results, how do you keep them coming back? And I would just say, like, we go to like legitimately just straight basics, fundamentals. We hit 1-yard shots over and over and over, and hit them solid, right? And if they can do that, then okay, now we can graduate to the next. But if they can't even hit 1-yard shots, I had one guy from Mississippi, came out probably like 3 times, and his doctor, he'd finish, and he was just spending the time. He's like, I'm coming out to fix my yips, and He'd come out, spend 3 days, and it was like, he got better, and then he'd go home and be like, I lost it. And then he'd come out 6 months later. And so, but finally, I said, let's just go back. Like, where are we at? How do you putt? And he said, I putt cross-handed. I was like, do you have any type of issue with? He said, no, I putt perfect cross-handed. Let's start chipping cross-handed. He starts chipping cross-handed, and he sent me a note like a week ago, and he's like, I'm still chipping it great cross-handed. But it's like, you got to it's like hit a 1-yard shot. Like the people that really struggle with the yips, it's got to be like hit a 1-yard shot and pat yourself on the back. Like take a moment and pat yourself on the back. Like it's more sports psychology than it is really about the technique at that point, right? But you just want little wins, itty bitty wins, and then reward yourself for those little wins.
Do you have any specific drills for some of the faults I think we've all seen? Is coming down to impact, excessive right side bend, lean on the right foot too much, flick the wrist, and even after you get him in a really good setup position, do you have any kind of go-to stuff to combat those specific faults, which I think are extremely common?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think usually what I see through impact usually stems from something that happens in the backswing. So it's usually going to be a cause and effect of like, okay, I've got too much ball speed built up here. Let me go this way because I want to soften it. Or let me go this way because I want to kind of soften the blow. Usually it becomes length of backswing, too much wrist, face too shut, path too out. Usually those things are the things that I see as far as what causes people to then go, oh, let me try to save it right through impact. But like I do a pause drill with people all the time, like a freezer drill where I'll have them get to the top and just be here, and let's just hang here for a second and see how that feels. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, I don't think I can get it to this red flag from this static position. Okay, now you got to go, right? There's not going to be any room to go this way. They got to move through it to actually get it to the hole. And that's where it's like if we can get them in a good setup backswing spot, hopefully athleticism and just a feel of like, oh gosh, I don't think I can hit this 15 yards. That will encourage them to get that rotation and athleticism on the way through. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can you demonstrate, hit some shots from the two different type of families that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Say to the green right there?
Yeah. Yeah, so the two different families, right, is if you couldn't hear his question, he said, can you hit shots from the two different families to this green? So the first one would be like the high one out of the rough, flop shot. So, you can kind of find it, when the ball is sitting down in the rough, right? This one. That's horrible. Haven't practiced much. So like and I'll get to the next one here in a second, but one of the things that sort of stands out is like, I was in France last week with this Matthew Pavon, chips cross-handed, right? So you look at Matt Fitzpatrick and Pavon, they chip cross-handed. What does that sort of position look like here? Like, yeah, a lot of width, right? Not a lot of narrowness, right? And so what did he bring me back to France to do? Not work on that. Work on thick rough. Work on bunker shots. We didn't work on that at all. He's like, I'm already good at that. I want to work on rough bunker shots. So thick rough and bunker is a different family. He's like, I don't know. This doesn't work out of the thick rough. It doesn't work out of the bunker. So we switched his hands around and got him more of this. Right, so that's where like the two families that I'm talking about. That's sort of where, like I see it sort of vividly where it's like, if you're doing this, like, and I would say most of my amateur golfers too, they're either really good at one or really good at the other. They're either like, yeah, I'm really good at this, but I'm terrible at this. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I just feel like for me, it's like a left-handed motion or it's a right-handed motion for me as a right-handed golfer. Like that's the difference in my mind as to like what it really kind of looks and feels like. Does that make sense to you guys?
Parker, if somebody can't do the lead motion to come back, let it release, can you teach it right-sided, trail-sided?
Boy, that's a good question. He said if someone can't do it this way with the lead side, can you teach them with the trail side? I've only found a handful of people that feel it with their trail hand on sort of that release. There's been a couple. But yeah, I think, and again, just to be careful of like what people feel and what's actually happening too. Tiger definitely probably feels it more right hand that way, but yeah, that's sort of what he feels. I guess I would say. I would typically say if you there's only been a handful of people that really connect this way and that have come to me. Most people, I get them swinging this way and they're like, oh, that makes sense. No one's really said it that way. But I totally understand what you're saying. I think that the people that come to me, very rarely do they get their lead hand and feel this way, and their trail hand and feel this way and this way. I find that more rare of an occasion.
Or when you talk about feel, like a 30 and 60 yard shot, do you suggest lengthening the backswing or just changing clubs?
Yeah, so you said for a 30 to like 60 yard shot, what would you change? You're going to change length of backswing for the higher level player. Length of backswing, speed of rotation, and then you can kind of manipulate club face and shaft position as well. I would say for the amateur golfer, I would definitely go down and loft a little bit. They don't need to hit it with their highest lofted club. But for the higher level player, I would say it's going to be length of backswing. I mean, for me, people talk about the clock system or whatever. It's like, I like to, if you're going to look at a clock, I like to feel like the clock is with the shaft and not my lead arm. So, because I could have my lead arm here and the shaft could be here. I could do that. My lead arm's still in the same spot, right? So I like to pay attention to this shaft position. So shaft position here is going to be kind of like 30, 40, 50, 60. And then I'd say for me above 50, I get closer to my full swing. Inside of 50 is more like a pitch shot for me. Amateur golfers, I would go down and loft rather than, yeah.
Can you speak to reading the lie? I think you mentioned it a little earlier about shots that you're going to make with what's going on with all the different grasses.
Yeah, so he's asking about reading the lie. Reading the lie is a bit of an art form. I think all of us that have been around golf for a long time, that golf IQ is just kind of built in there. But, reading the lie, I think I'll give you an example. Like I was at Napa with Keith Mitchell and a couple other guys, and we were talking about the rough. There's like 4 different kinds of rough around the greens there in Napa. And so we were talking about the different lies, and Keith is like, well, I think this one's going to come out like this. And I'm like, well, I don't think it's going to come out dead. I think that one's going to come out hot, right? It was sitting all the way at the bottom. But the way that he was playing it, right, he was playing it more this way, right? So he was catching a lot of grass beforehand. The ball was coming out with nothing. And I was like, I think you're just playing it wrong, and we got to build in some steepness here out of the rough. I think it needs to be more here. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, that made the world of difference. So how he read the lie was based on his technique, but his technique was a little bit off. And so as we changed the technique, now his reading of the lie became like, oh, it's sitting down, I got to go down and get it, but I also need to build in some release so it doesn't go too far. But I would say, reading the lie is all about determining what type of shot you're going to hit, right? more down it's going to sit. Well, it just depends. Like if it's sitting down and into the grain, I'm probably going to have to get a bit steeper on it, go down and loft. Anytime that ball's in Bermuda grass, I'm usually going down and loft. I mean, I grew up in Hawaii, Bermuda grass, chip with my 60 almost exclusively. And when I find myself in Bermuda grass, I'm like, give me that 56. It just works. It just works better for me out of the Bermuda grass. But reading the lie is always so important, trying to figure out where we're going to go and what we need to hit, right? First thing we're looking for is like, can we get access to the back of the ball? Is there cushion underneath the ball? And a lot of this is like in the rough. So is there access to the back of the ball in the rough? If there's grass behind it, how much grass is behind it? If there's a bunch of grass behind it, it's going to slow the golf ball down. That's going to tell me how fast I need to swing. If there's cushion underneath the golf ball, that's going to dictate my ball position. So if the ball's sitting up, I'm going to put it further back in my stance. If the ball's sitting down, I'm going to go further forward in my stance. So those things are like we're looking at to try to figure out how much speed, what type of a swing we're going to give it, and how the ball is then going to come out and react on the green. So it's like it's very nuanced, and obviously like the thicker the rough, the more you kind of got to read it and the more speed you got to give. Fairway lies, not quite as nuanced, but still, you know, there's still some reading of the lie that you need to understand, can you spin the ball, or are you going to need to stop it with some height? So, you know, that's where it gets into like, okay, well, are we going to spin it or are we going to stop it with height? You know, or are you going to use a combination of both? And then you go back to like, which one gives me the best chance for success? Which one am I better at? Am I better at hitting the high ones? Am I better at hitting the low ones? Am I better at hitting a 7-iron and bumping it? You know, if you're at Pinehurst and this thing goes up and onto a green, am I better at hitting a 7-iron or a hybrid and bumping it into the hill? I mean, there's just so many options that, you know, it's like there's no wrong way, right? It's just what gives you the best chance for success, right? What gives your player the best chance for success in that situation? But it comes from just millions of times of plan, and you know, and I've gotten lucky to be around some of the really, really greats of the game, and to hear how they break down like what this lie is going to do is like mind-blowing. Just because they've spent thousands of hours sitting there, you know, just being like, I'm going to try this motion with this lie. I'm going to chalk it up and see how that worked. So I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And then obviously, like, you know, in the bunker, same thing, right? I mean, it's like that ball sitting down, it's like my philosophy in the bunker is going to change quite a bit. Versus if it's sitting up, man, I'm sitting up like this. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to spin this thing, hit it high and soft. But if it's sitting way down on the bottom, man, I'm going to get close to it. I'm going to go more that way. But the lies could be like an inch apart from each other. One could be sitting way down and one could be sitting way up. Play it totally different. Yeah, agreed. It's just not quite as sexy, right? I don't know. I think it's fascinating.
People don't know it, so they can't teach it. Is that maybe part of it?
Yeah, and even, I mean, yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think that people don't pay attention to it. Even the people that come to me and I say, okay, tell me what you're seeing here. And they say, well, yeah, I don't think I can. This ball's sitting up and it's going to spin. And I'm like, this ball's sitting down. What are you talking about? You know, so it's like there's people. It's like a muscle. You gotta like train it, right? And so, but you know, if you're talking to a weekend warrior who's, you know, who plays once a month, they're not going to spend the time to go and throw 20 balls down and try different shots. But even though that's what's required.
I think really being a mad scientist out there, I got that information really early on, where it's just like, just go camp out, be a mad scientist, see what happens if you put the ball this way, what happens if it's that way, and like take the results out of it and let it be all experimental and just curiosity.
Yeah, and it's just so hard to describe, I think, where it's like, okay, soft condition, ball sitting down, ball above your feet, below your feet, downhill, uphill. I mean, there's so many combinations that it's really difficult to like really have every single one of them and be like, okay, this is what we're doing. Because then, okay, maybe that's what you're doing for that shot, but you got 30 yards of green to work with versus one you got 5 yards of green to work with. Then it just totally changes, and you may just change clubs and the whole thing.
Parker, I almost couldn't wait to ask you this, being a big fan of you as a person first, and knowing you as a player for a long time, and watching you do the great things that you're doing coaching now. I guess the question would be, do you know how much that you coach golf, like some of these kids coaching golf, whether they're hitting drivers or they're hitting irons? I mean, you sound like a golf coach, not like just a short game coach. And from kind of watching you play and listening to you now, it's pretty interesting for me. So I guess that would be one part of it. And then the second thing would be really interesting. We don't get very many tour players that become coaches. So I think the second part of that, has the coaching made you a better player or look at the game differently?
Yeah, a couple of great, good questions, James. I would say, to answer the second one first. We got back to Phoenix. I played a lot of golf over the summer. I felt like I had a better understanding of kind of my own game and whatnot. But we got back to Phoenix at August 1st for the kids' school, and I haven't. Literally, my clubs were still in my travel suitcase. Yeah. So, and what is it? October. Yeah. So it's like I don't practice, which is sad. It's also been 110 in Phoenix, so it's just not that fun to practice. The coaching side of it, I feel like when I played, I studied a lot on the mental game. I felt like that was my superpower. Like you were out with me plenty of practice rounds, and I'd hit like 6 fairways and 8 greens, and I'd shoot 68. And all the boys that you were with are like, how in the world did he just do that? And it's like, I always felt like my short game and my mental game was my superpower. And so I always studied that quite a bit as to like routines, mental self-talk, all that stuff. My dad was a coach. My brother is a coach. Like I kind of have a little bit of that in my genes. And so I think I've taken to it probably a little bit quicker than maybe most would. I think my patience level is fairly high. So if someone comes into me and they're like, look, I've been yipping it for 12 years and they're like on the verge of tears because it's ruining their life because they got to give up golf. Like I sit there and listen for 30 minutes before we even start. But I've also been there because I went through a period of golf in my life where I hit it like 90 this way and 90 that way. So I understand what that feels like. So I think I have a little bit more empathy for like as I'm coaching and these people have these struggles. I think it's important to have a bit of that empathy and to see where they're coming from. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah, it does. I also thought like one of the things that I like the best is somebody that shoots lower than it looks.
I always did that.
That guy, like I used to when I first started doing this, I liked pretty, but pretty's cool, but it's pretty cool when pretty works in as well. But you were always really good at that. But just the way that you talk about the short game, I've watched you so much, and I don't know how to turn on a computer every time I see something. You sound like you're teaching full swing when you're teaching.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. No, I mean, and I think like I'm cut more from your cloth of, I'm not sitting there with a TrackMan or a Foresight or a measuring device. I mean, I know the sound, I know the flight, I can see it, I can hear it, we can see the ball reacting. To me, that's sort of the pure essence of it, and I think that's where I know that I'll be measuring quite a bit and doing a bunch of stuff with Titleist and Foresight and trying to help them with what they're doing as far as building wedges and building better ways to measure short game. But at the end of the day, I think we can all see it. We can hear it. You can hear that crisp sound. You can see the ball grabbing on the face and like coming out with some spin. Like I'm more cut out of your type of a cloth, Jamie, especially when it comes to coaching. Yeah.
I work primarily with juniors, good player juniors. And I think anybody that does is can relate to this question, but can you give us if your advice or insight into how to break the love affair with the
60 degree. So he said he works with a lot of high level juniors, and how do I break their? How can I give him some advice as to how to break their love of their 60 degree? I would say the thing that I notice is that most really good players on tour, they chip and pitch with one club. They get really good with that one club. If that junior golfer can beat you in a short game contest and you have all your clubs and they just have that one club, they have the green light.
no one's done it yet.
There you go. then they have to learn how to use other clubs, and it's going to serve them.
Any disciplines that you've had any luck with? Short of breaking their club.
Yeah, I mean, no, I just think you just make it a rule. Like if you can't beat me, and you use one club, and I use all my clubs. If you can't beat me on closest to the pin, playing 21, whatever it is, you got to start learning how to chip with other clubs. It'll serve them well, like down the road, because the way that golf courses are going these days with runoffs and like the thick rough is kind of going away. The roll offs are all sort of in vogue right now. You can't hit a lob wedge off a lot of those roll-offs. Like you got to be able to bump something in there. Pitching wedge, 7-iron, whatever it is. So it's a good skill for you to teach them. So I would say stick with it. My old coach, Greg Nichols out in Hawaii, he did the same thing to me. He said once you can beat me with that 60, you can use it exclusively. And so I did, and then he's been quiet since. Yeah.
Yeah, how would you define feel? I think we all know short game requires good feel. And then how would you have your students improve their feel, or strategies to improve feel?
I mean, I always just remember like growing up throwing out towels at like 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and just hitting shots and trying to land them on those towels. And now I do it a little bit differently, where I'll take like 5 balls and I'll put them at 10, 15, 20, all the way through basically 50 or 60 yards. And I'll stand up on the green and I'll put a basket there, or like these 2 baskets here, and I'll stand up on the green and I'll have my players hit up here, and I'll chart out, my high level players especially, I'll have them chart out, or I will chart it out as to where they're landing these golf balls. But I'll make them make a practice swing before they make their actual swing. And they can't do the same shot twice. It's 10, then 15, then 20, right? So they move back, and then they come back, and then they go back, and then they go back. So, and they got to make a practice swing, rehearsal swing is what I call it. And they got to make a rehearsal swing every time, so that they can feel what 30 in the air feels like. I'm not caring if they get it close to the hole. I just want to make sure they're landing it on this number, right? That's it. Because if they can own trajectory and stuff from fairway lies, they can own trajectory in their sort of spin right here. It's just like, can you land it on that spot? And that would be, if you can equate, okay, that felt like 28. Okay, that felt like 35. If I can equate that and then step in there and then hit it and know it went 35, I'm way ahead of everybody else. Because now I've just equated a feel in a rehearsal stroke to an actual stroke. So when I get on the golf course and I'm on the 12th hole and I haven't hit a 35-yard pitch shot in like 4 hours since I warmed up, what can I do? I can be like, yep, that's 35. Or I can spend 6 practice swings while other guys are hitting. No, that was 25. And then I find 35 in the air, and then I step in and I repeat it. That's how in my mind, that's how you find feel. When it comes,
We actually have a test subject for you here. So, everyone can see you in motion.
yeah, give him a round of applause. Parker.
Earl Gerlach.
Earl?
Earl.
Nice to meet you. All right, buddy. Well, you struggle short game?
On certain days I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
What and what would you say the misses are?
like a leading edge dig.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you chip mostly with like 60 degree or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost exclusively.
You live here in the area?
No, I don't. I live in Colorado. But I did get to play a little bit yesterday, and
Okay.
I was definitely still inspired to use that club most of the time.
Okay. The stage is yours. Why don't you come on over here?
Make a few, or
Yeah. Like what distance freaks you out? Is it close one, middle, far?
I would say
20, 30, 40, 50 yards,
like
5 yards,
60, 70 yards.
60, 70 yards?
Yeah, that's my biggest concern.
Okay.
Around the greens, I tend to be better.
Okay.
Closer as I get closer to the greens, I tend to be pretty good, but maybe 60 yards, 70 yards, I have a little bit of trouble controlling distance and contact.
Okay. Let me see you hit a couple.
60 yards? Maybe like
Yeah, you can kind of warm.
do you want me to start?
Yeah, you can kind of warm up into it. I don't know how warm you are. So
I'm standing back there in the sun,
so you said his struggles are more from like 50, 60, 70 yards, not as much around the greens. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty nice right there.
That's kind of like what I'm talking about, though. That's kind of like, that feels a little leading edge dig to me. Just feels like a little thick, something like that. And so then if I was working on anything, I tend to work on trying to really use the bottom of the club really effectively as well as I can.
Okay.
And
How do you do that?
I usually make rehearsals and, well, first is set up, so I try and go more neutral. So
Versus?
Yeah, versus like leaning
Okay.
the shaft.
Okay.
And so I try and go more neutral with the shaft, or like
Yep.
straight up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And then even when I make impact with it, I'm trying to go more up and down with the shaft.
Okay.
I think when I get to my longer shots, though, it doesn't serve me as well, because I think I, like you said, I take too much of the speed off of it, and then I can't control the distance or the spin for that matter, like on 60 yards, 70 yards.
Yep. So could you guys hear him like in the back a little bit? He chips it pretty well. He says he tries to get the shaft fairly neutral, but as he gets further away, he doesn't quite have as good a command from 50, 60, 70 yards. And I would say, you know, inside of 30, 40 yards, like that's one sort of area, right? Once you get to sort of 60, like we're wanting more compression once we're getting to 60. I don't need that much compression when I'm at 30 yards, 20 yards. Once we get to kind of 50, 60 yards, I'm looking for more compression, which means, like that was beautiful there, like, which means, you know, compression's gonna mean some shaft leaning forward, some pressure going forward, some good rotation.
What that feels like to me is, so I think the dig partially comes from getting the club. My path is usually right,
Okay.
and so then I get the club, I think, a little behind me, and then I'll dig the leading edge this way. It's because I know I lean it a little bit, but I know you can lean it.
Yeah,
and
for
not
sure.
Dig the shaft.
Yeah.
Dig the leading edge.
Let
So
me-
that one felt more like club, more path, more neutral, perhaps, something like that. And then I used that one. The
Body
bottom
was-
club, yeah, felt really good.
Let's see like a 50 yarder.
So maybe like purple stick.
Yeah. So how was that for you?
It wasn't that solid. It was a little toey. I could feel it. It wasn't miserable. I mean, if it would have gone decent distance, like if it wasn't 20 yards short of what I was trying to go to, then it would have been better.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so bad.
Okay.
Like as far as contact goes.
Yeah. So a little low on the face.
Yeah, it was wasn't solid.
So where do you feel like you're generating your speed from? Length of backswing or wrist hinge or rotation? What do you feel like you generate your speed to hit at 60 yards?
I definitely, in general, I think it comes more from my arms and my hands.
Okay.
I think that when I tend to use my pivot a little bit better, I think that helps, but sometimes if I don't get the club in quite the right place and then I pivot, I really just duff it
Okay.
dramatically. And So I think.
And when you say pivot, you're talking about like your hips.
Yeah, my setup, and then being able to. The way I think of it is kind of like driving my right knee towards my left and kind of finishing with my right touching my left, something like that. So that's what it feels like to me.
Okay. Yeah, I would say like for me, a lot of this stuff in the short game, the quieter the legs can be, the better. Yeah, you know, like we don't want any of this going on. I would say sort of throughout. So if a player is telling me like, hey, I'm really feeling like my knees are driving this way or that way, to me there's a little bit of somewhat of a red flag there, or at least it piques my interest a little bit, especially if they're struggling in that area. Like I might just help you rotate on one. Yep, go for it. So I would rather a player feel more this and then let the legs respond rather than him feeling like his knee's driving. Because the more that the knee drives and it goes this way, this guy's going to kind of want to hang back, and then you got bad contact all over the map. So I would rather you feel like this. Yeah, feel like you're. Yes, more here is getting. We can do a practice swing if you want, just to feel it. So 60 yards. That way. Let's do it in like real motion. Yeah. Okay.
So it feels more like.
Let's do it together.
Feels more like trying.
Yeah, it feels more like you're like a rib cage. Yep. Let's hit one together.
Okay. Hit one together.
Yep. I'll help you on the through.
Like being at the prom again.
It's a little awkward.
With you standing right there.
Yeah. Although I'm in the captain's position here.
He's big spoon. Okay, all right, that's okay. My brain's having trouble processing what I'm saying. Anyway, with all you guys staring at me like this.
Now hit the shot.
Yeah, now hit it.
Here we go.
All right.
Feel that the rest. I'm gonna try and feel it right here.
Yep.
Here we go.
So what it'll do, and if I spin you a little early, you're going to catch a lot more ball first, right? So if you have an issue of hitting too early, leading edge kind of digging beforehand, if you start working on getting this guy going, pressure is going to shift more that way. You're going to start seeing more ball first contact. And obviously, like I went too fast for you there, but you'll start seeing more ball first contact.
We just haven't been dance partners.
We haven't. No, you were a little bit jumpy on me.
All right, I can do it. Here we go. I'm gonna feel that thoracic. Here we go.
Nice. And like for a player like this, you can kind of see like he's got a little bit of this sort of down cock there. So I would do like a lot of pause drills with him because he creates a lot of his speed there, right? And then so as he creates his speed there, this guy wants to stall. Yeah. I thought there's a lot more better things happening there.
I can feel it. It felt good. It felt more in sequence.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's all about putting the right puzzle pieces, together.
I'm gonna do that again. Pause. That was good.
Yeah. I just, it just seems like there's a little bit of, it's a lot of hands, a lot of arms.
No doubt.
And I want you to stick it back here, and I want you to stick it over here too. So I'll help you with awareness on this side. So the same way that we want to use this pivot on the way through, we got to use it on the way back, right? It can't just be like arms. Yeah, there you go. You feel that?
Yeah, got it.
Go to the top and pause.
I like what you said earlier. You said you had two ones that were, you mentioned two exercises earlier. You had one where you went like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe even the other one that you said is something like touching your arm.
Yeah,
you didn't do it this way,
there.
but it made me think. Yeah, it made me think.
They go back together. Yep. Yep.
Okay, got it.
All right, to the top and pause. Yep. Use this. Good. Yep. So we're gonna pause and then you're gonna hit it. Good. Now go. So you can kind of see like how much this thing goes that way, right? And so we gotta kind of retrain him to not let it be there and then really get narrow on him. Go to the top again. Top and pause. Yeah. Now from there I want you to rotate, right?
More solid.
Yeah. But I gotta get you feeling like, and this ideally we would start shorter because he's still trying to hit it 60 yards from a static position. So I would want to be like, let's just hit this 10, 15, 20 yards. Get to here so that you don't feel like you have to do this to generate the speed to hit it 60.
Let's do that. I'm gonna hit the yellow flag.
Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah, because I can feel it in the hands a lot. That's true. Almost like feels more dead wristed and just more, I know it feels like right now the feel of driving it from my chest isn't necessarily paying the best dividends, but I understand what you mean as far as translating the motion here versus the motion.
Yep. Yeah. So put it in your belly button real quick. Yep, and grab down there. Now just pivot, feet closer together, like you're gonna hit a 20-yard pitch. So now pivot to the top. A little more. There you go. Soften your hands. This is where we should be, right? For a 20-yard shot. How'd you get there? Use this, right?
Yeah, I understand.
But, you know, I mean, like you're a good player. So like good players are usually going to be more like, well, let me just feel it with my hands. Let me just feel it with my hands. And it's like a lot of times they can kind of get a bit off because they've just felt it with their hands so much. It's like you got to reawaken the body. But the more that you get this thing kind of like, you like to kind of get this lead hand kind of going this way and the club outside, and then you get it narrow on the way down. This guy's just going to turn off, right? Your chest is just going to totally shut off because you don't need it to recruit any more speed. You've already created plenty of speed.
Oh, you mean like if I were to...
Well, yeah. So like, I mean, when you get to about here and then you do that, the chest is like, I'm out. You don't need my help anymore.
I got it all right here.
You got to let it out.
I see what you mean.
Which your strike goes all over the place. Versus if you can get to a spot here and you're like, oh, I don't think I can get it there. Then you really got to use your body on the through.
All right. So then, if I was going to take something away from what we just discussed, I would say I'm going to feel it more from here.
Yep.
A little bit less wrist, like more dead wristed in my head, more chest, or more like upper thoracic. It almost feels like right underneath my.
Yep.
Right underneath my chest line here.
Mm-hmm.
And then turning this on and turning this off.
Yep.
Do you agree?
Perfect.
Do you like that?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to try and hit a shorter one now.
Yeah, like 20 yards. I mean, even that, I mean, you could see like top of backswing is still like pretty high, right? For a 20-yard shot.
Got it. So you feel like, okay, I understand.
So like this would be a great.
It all here and I'm not.
Yeah, this would be a great example of somebody who you'd really want to start small, right? Because he would never do that with a 5-iron. He would never like.
Can I try?
Yeah, hit it 3 yards. Right here.
Where does that mean? Where does the needle land? Right here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it carried. But you can see the efficiency with the motion. It probably carried a couple yards too far, but like that was great, right? But the efficiency of the motion was much more quiet than like him trying to do that, right? So I would get you.
Too much of my full swing pattern.
Come closer. Keep coming. Okay. No, don't get farther away. This guy. Come on. Throw it more through your lifeline. That way. Yes, there you go. So now, how weak does this position feel? How weak does it feel?
Just feels like putter grip.
Yeah, but it feels weak. Like you're not going to hit this 100 yards.
No.
Right?
That's correct.
So in his setup, he's telling me a story. Every setup tells a story. He's telling me the story that he's going to hit this like 3 yards. Perfect. Like that's what we're looking for, right? And then we start building further and further back. Yeah.
How much hip rotation are you looking for people to get in a backswing? Are you trying to kind of minimize a little X factor, take some speed off? Are you keeping the lower body more quiet, like you said, like keeping the legs a little more quiet?
Yeah. So he's asking about how much are the hips moving and whatnot. You know, I think of it as more of an upper body type of emotion, and your hips are going to react to that. I definitely don't want like huge hip turn, but I don't want you to keep them quiet either. I mean, there should definitely be some movement. I think if you go too far with it, it's not great, and if you don't go enough, it's not great either. A little bit is good, but I don't think it should be. So go to like 7 iron, 9 iron. I don't think it should be like, you know, like, hey, I'm gonna focus on like turning my hip, unless I've got somebody that's just very like not moving at all. But as we start going 5, 7, 9, like there should start to be a little bit of movement, right, with the hips and the knees, but they're being moved in response to the upper body. Like when he says like I'm trying to drive my right knee, I'm like, that's usually a recipe for disaster. From what I've seen, right, from the patterns that I've seen, you know.
When do you, so you changed the way I was holding the club, you put it almost
Yes.
more like putter grip in my lifeline. When do you start changing it? Or when do you?
Probably when you get to like a 52, like your gap wedge, I would then let you go back to your normal grip. So like, what are you at, 9?
I get 9 iron.
Yeah, hit me like 1.
A couple of lifeline or 1 lifeline.
Yeah.
Sort of similar setup. Yeah, just to get the feeling of.
Yeah, so like.
I'm gonna go white flag.
No. All I want you to do is hit it 5 yards.
5 yards, got it.
Yeah. Okay, good. And 1 more. See, like he wants to start hitting it far, right? It's like, it's like, dude, we gotta take the ball speed away. That's so good. Okay, so now let's take the same concept with 52. And you can try one with your putter grip, and then we'll go into your regular grip.
Same thing, same distance.
Yeah, 5 yards. Pretty easy, right? But there's not the excessive motion that he's kind of trying to build. Yeah.
How much of like the skills or the drills that you do are based off of like what you felt as a player versus what you see as a coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that there's definitely some that I really connect with, and then there's others that I just don't. That I've just sort of developed working with players that I would have never done on my own. But like, you know, like right hand only, I never did that as a player. Pause drill, I never did as a player.
I think a lot about it is understanding the person that's in front of you, and you know what I mean, not reverting back to what you think is good, but what would help them.
Yeah, dude, that's great. Now let's build that to like a little bit of a longer swing. Let's just keep the putter grip on there for 1 second. Just go a little longer. Let's carry it to like the red flag. Carry it to the red flag, but I want you to use this to make your movement back. Nice. So we would just kind of do this and like keep going further back and further back and further back until he started to get this as his speed lever. That would hopefully like get out of there. Yeah, I play around with it. Sometimes I'm like, okay, we got to move on to back to your other grip, and other times I'm like, dude, you're pitching it so good, like let's leave that on there for a minute. You know, I've got a lot of high level players that go to putter grip, like regular putter grip, not cross-handed, but regular putter grip, and they stick with it, and it's their trigger of like, oh, I'm slowing the ball down. I'm not trying to smash. Yeah, over 50. Yeah, over 50. Yeah.
In addition to technique, how much emphasis do you put on your students being properly fit in the wedges, as well as ensuring that they have the right amount of bounce for playing ability and also interpretation?
Yeah, I would say usually lesson 1 is like we're doing we're doing technique stuff, and then if they come back like less than 2, which I hope that they don't, but if they're like, hey, my wedges are off or whatever, what should I do? Then I'm like, let's look at the wedges and see, are they going left, or are you getting wear marks too much on the toe or whatever. But usually it's sort of technique first, and then, because if you just get fit for wedges with crap technique, it doesn't do much good, I think. Yeah.
Did you personally change your bounces due to different areas of the country? Or?
Yeah, I would carry a couple 60s. Like when I was working with Morikawa a couple years ago, like he carried 3 60 degrees, just depending on where they were. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I just had a question about what you're seeing when you're hitting the shot, because I noticed in your practice swing you tend to kind of do like the Annika thing where you look over there, and then even when you hit the shot, it looks like your eyes were going ahead of the ball before you hit the ball.
Yeah.
Do you see like the spot you're landing, or you see like a visualization?
It's more just like my eyes are connected to my chest, and I'm just trying to feel like I'm moving. I'm trying to feel like I'm rotating. I'm getting out of the way.
You're not worried about what's happening down below?
No. That sounded good. Yeah, it's not. I'm not like trying to pick a spot, or I'm just trying to like encourage myself to keep moving, right? Versus like, I think we're all sort of guilty of like, what were we taught as kids playing Little League baseball? It's like, keep your eye on the ball. It's like, well, in golf, like you don't need to keep your eye on the ball. There's 100 examples of great players who never kept their eye on the ball, right? So it's like, I just want to feel like I keep moving. So that would be what I was doing there, and that's just sort of developed over time. I haven't really necessarily like consciously thought of it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you speak to using the balance?
Yeah. So I mean, I think
and specifically maybe a 30 or 40 yarder that's going to come in kind of low and high.
So yeah, I mean, I think using the bounce is probably more inside of 30 yards. Once we kind of get outside of 30, it's a little bit more like you're wanting a little more compression, more ball first. Inside of 30, using the bounce is absolutely acceptable, and it's something that I'm a big fan of. I think it's like golf is so hard as it is that why not allow something to sort of help you? Yeah, so I mean, I just think, when I pitched my idea to the 3 lines on the hosel to Vokey a few years ago, we talked about like where do you want the shaft, like for a pitch shot 10, 15, 20 yards, if you want to use the bounce, like where do you want it? And it's like, well, around 1 or 2 degrees, 0, somewhere in there, like that's where you sort of want to be able to engage the bounce. And the bounce is just going to help kind of keep you like a surfboard, keep you riding up on top of the wave, right? And it keeps you hitting those lower grooves, which is what kind of the wedge makers want you to do. They want you to hit grooves 2, 3, 4, 5. So, if you happen to scrape the grass an inch before the golf ball, you're going to hit almost an identical shot to if you hit it perfectly golf ball first. So the bounce was sort of the back edge there that's going to kind of help keep you on top of the ground. Yeah, so that I don't know if I would necessarily equate that to like the spin to using the bounce. I would equate more that spin to speed, right? And the further you get away from the green, the more speed you can put, the more spin you can impart on the golf ball. So I wouldn't necessarily, but I mean, there's definitely players, we've all sort of felt it, like especially at the high level of feeling a duff spinner where it spins, you hit behind the golf ball and it spins more than if you would have just hit golf ball first. And I think Ping has done some studies on that where they've seen a slip and grip phenomenon that's happened where there'll be some grass that will get in between, the ball will slip up the face and it'll grip even more.
How about bruising the ground with the bounce?
Yep. And that would just kind of go to like, making your misses a little bit better. I wouldn't necessarily equate that to spin. Yeah.
So we got time for one more for Parker. Who'd you call on?
Hey Parker, thanks so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. When dealing with Mr. and Mrs. Haverkamp, when dealing with them, and obviously your swing change without having that wrist kind of hinge too much, is that something you're looking forward to change in a full swing as well? Or is that something you're even talking about? Obviously, with us doing, like I said, kind of golf shop lessons.
Yep.
That's something we're going to ask about a lot. Hey, I changed this with this little chip shot or pitch shot, so I change that in my full swing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think it depends on a case-by-case basis, but I mean, the only people that I ever change grips on are the people that are the Mr. and Mrs. Haverkamps who have the really weak grip kind of going through their lifeline, and it's like, this will help you throughout the bag. Like if you can just grip it a little bit more strongly, you won't chip it any worse. I mean, there's some of the best chippers and pitchers of the golf ball have really strong grips. So I don't think that, like, I wouldn't change a person's grip weaker to help them chip it better. But I would change a person's grip to stronger to help them throughout the bag, not only chipping, but throughout the bag. But I think that, for the most part, Mr. and Mrs. Haverkamp, they don't pivot, they don't move. So I think that pivoting and moving is very helpful for them. And then as you want to get more speed, right, they can start building that in there. But I would say learning this is an invaluable quality for someone who's shooting 110 throughout the bag.
All right. Well, I think we got time for one more, Randy. Yeah. Go ahead.
Parker, what's your recipe on face rotation? It seems like a lot of players come back with it shut. Can you teach us shut?
Yeah. I don't.
Number of my students, their most common problem is taking the club back shut. So the recipe on face rotation, and can you help someone to be successful coming from a shut position?
Yeah, I mean, I would say too shut is an issue, absolutely, because that's going to create more ball speed, and you got to do something through impact. But I don't necessarily subscribe to like you got to roll it open. I think that's a lot of forearm rotation that you got to compensate for somehow to get back to the ball. So I like to just think of it as like if I were to just go here and to just pivot back, where does that line up with my spine angle? I'm good right there. That may appear shut to some people. Yeah, it's not. It's square to my spine angle. And so a lot of my guys pitch it that way. And there's I don't see a downside to it. And if we need to go higher, then we can just set the face more open at setup and still be in that position. It would change, right? If I'm setting there and I just pivoted, it changes. But I focus more on the pivot and just, I don't necessarily want this because that's just another variable, right? It's like, let me build this baseline and then we can kind of get creative. But if this is your baseline, this and this, I just find that really hard to manage, of players at all levels. Yeah.
Infringing on the last question, but
sure.
Regarding the one that scares the guys from California is the uphill, muddy, thin lie, majorly into the grain. So question would be, is there any using the bounce? We're talking about inside of, say, 20 yards. Is there any using the bounce on that type of shot? Is it okay to touch the ground before the ball in that circumstance? And if not, then what are you doing to...
Yeah, so that's a great question. It depends on how steep the slope is, right? Is it like a 5% slope or is it like...
Both. One's gentle, one's...
Yeah, so like I would say if it's a gentle little slope, you can swing with the slope and use a little bit less loft, pitching wedge, gap wedge, whatever it might be, and swing with the slope. If it's a steeper slope, I like to actually lean into the slope just to really, it's like the more I go this way, I'm going to like bottom out back here. I got to make sure that because my club is coming in this way, like if I bottom out back here, it's sticking in the ground. So I got to make sure that like if I'm on this slope, like I will lean into this slope and just make sure that I've got my sternum in a spot where like it's going to be ball first. The slope will help me with like softening it, but like I got to make sure that I get here so that I can get ball first. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Well, good stuff. Parker, we really appreciate you coming out to this year's Teaching and Coaching Summit.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, good job, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Randy. I appreciate you, buddy. You too.